world outside the frosted panes of the Sunrise Diner was a study in deceptive peace. Harmony Creek, nestled quietly somewhere beneath the vast indifferent sky, lay hushed under a fresh blanket of snow. It was the kind of pristine white that makes you believe in purity, in fresh starts, in a town where nothing truly ugly could ever take root. But often, the deepest chills aren't found in the biting wind, but in the coldness of human heart. And on this particular Tuesday evening, that chill was about to settle heavy on the broad shoulders of a man who knew a thing or two about fighting battles. Elias Vance, known to his brothers-in-arms simply as Eli, walked with a quiet dignity that belied the worn military jacket hanging from his frame. Every thread of that jacket, though faded, seemed to hold the echoes of distant thunder, of duty, of sacrifice. His steps, unhurried despite the biting wind, carried the cadence of a man who had marched through worse terrain than snowy sidewalks. He was a decorated army ranger, a man who had seen the raw, ugly edges of the world and survived. But surviving the battlefield often prepares you for little else. And so, Eli Vance, a warrior who had once navigated the treacherous valleys of faraway lands, now navigated the indifferent streets of Harmony Creek, invisible to most. The aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh-brewed coffee beckoned from the Sunrise Diner, a warm, inviting beacon against the encroaching twilight. Eli pushed through the heavy glass door, the gentle chime a tiny announcement that went largely unheard. He found a quiet booth near the back, just wanting a moment's respite, a hot cup of coffee to thaw the gnawing cold in his bones, the clinking of porcelain, the low hum of conversation. It was a symphony of normalcy he hadn't experienced in too long, but that normalcy, like the freshly fallen snow, was about to be trampled. It began subtly. Two officers, Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, entered, their uniforms crisp, their presence immediate and heavy. Eli barely registered them, absorbed in the simple warmth of the diner, but then he heard the whispers. Not aimed at him, not yet. But the casual way they eyed the other customers, the way their conversations seemed to hush as they passed. It spoke volumes. Then Sterling's gaze landed on Eli. It was a look that stripped him bare, reducing him not to a man, not to a veteran, but to a stereotype. "Well, well," Sterling drawled, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the diner's gentle hum. "Look what the cat dragged in. Thought we cleaned up all the, undesirables." Dixon. Dixon chuckled, a low guttural sound that grated on Eli's nerves. "Guess some always find their way back to the warmth, huh, Sterling? Like a moth to a flame." Eli kept his eyes fixed on the condensation, tracing patterns on his water glass. He knew this dance. He'd danced it before. Years of discipline, of training, to maintain composure under fire, now served him well in the face of this casual cruelty. Sterling then approached Eli's booth, his shadow falling over Eli's worn jacket. "You got any business here, old man?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Eli slowly met his gaze. "Just waiting for a coffee, officer." Sterling's eyes narrowed, scanning Eli's jacket, finally landing on the faded Army Ranger Regiment patch. With a swift, unexpected motion, he snatched Eli's worn but cherished Ranger identification from his inner pocket. The thin plastic, worn smooth by years of handling, felt like a piece of his very soul being ripped away. Sterling examined it, a sneer twisting his lips. "Army Ranger, huh? What, you think this makes you above the law, old man?" He flipped the ID dismissively onto the counter, where it spun briefly before settling face down. "Around here, that just tells me you're a liability. Another mouth to feed, another problem for our community." Dixon leaned against the booth opposite, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Harmony Creek's got no room for vagrants. We're trying to keep things clean for the new residents, if you catch my drift." Eli's jaw tightened. The words were not just insults, they were a violation. They dishonored every mile he'd marched, every sacrifice he'd witnessed, every brother he'd lost. A searing humiliation burned through him, threatening to ignite the controlled rage that simmered beneath his calm exterior. But the warrior in him knew better. This wasn't the time for an open fight. This was the time to gather intelligence. But Eli wasn't the only one watching. Across the diner, behind the counter, Maya, the sharp, empathetic waitress, felt her stomach churn. Her brother, a Marine, had come back from overseas with ghosts in his eyes, lucky to have a home. She recognized the faded uniform on Eli's jacket, the quiet dignity in his posture. Her heart ached with a mixture of fear and fury. Fear of losing her job, fear of police retaliation. Harmony Creek's police force wasn't exactly known for its understanding, but a deeper, undeniable moral imperative swelled within her. This wasn't right. This wasn't justice. This was an affront to everything she believed in. Her trembling hand, hidden beneath the counter, found her phone. She knew of a community outreach hotline, a small legal aid group she followed on social media. Her fingers flew across the keypad, a silent, desperate prayer on her lips as she made the call that would, unbeknownst to anyone in that diner, set in motion a chain of events that would shake Harmony Creek and far, far beyond. The officers, satisfied with their display of power, finally turned to leave, Sterling's voice echoing with a final taunt. "Don't let us catch you here again, Ranger." They had no idea they weren't just harassing a nameless vagrant. They were awakening a warrior who had already survived far worse than anything they could inflict, and they had just handed him the very tool he needed to fight back. This wasn't just about a coffee. It was about the profound sense of betrayal Eli felt, a betrayal not just from two corrupt officers, but from a system he had served, a society that had cast him aside. This seemingly minor act of cruelty, dismissed as routine, was in fact a symptom of a much larger, darker current flowing beneath the pristine surface of Harmony Creek. And that current, Eli knew, was about to be exposed. Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, their smug grins still lingering in the air, finally swaggered out of the Sunrise Diner, leaving behind a silence far colder than the winter night. They thought they had dismissed a nuisance. They thought they had put an old man in his place. They had no idea they had just kicked a sleeping giant. Eli Vance didn't move for a long moment. His coffee, when it finally arrived, remained untouched. The anger still burned, a hot, bitter coal in his gut, but it was no longer wild. It was controlled, distilled by years of unimaginable pressure, sharpened by a lifetime of strategic thinking. This wasn't the first time he'd faced an enemy who underestimated him. In fact, it was usually when they were at their most dismissive that they were most vulnerable. Slowly, deliberately, Eli reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket, not for another ID, but for a faded, creased photograph. It showed two young men, side by side, their smiles wide and genuine against a backdrop of desert sun and distant mountains. One was Eli, the other, with eyes that held both fierce intelligence and a mischievous glint, was Captain Jamal "Ghost" Evans. Jamal, his closest brother-in-arms, a brilliant intelligence officer, lost years ago in a highly classified operation that still haunted Eli's nights. Jamal was more than a friend, he was a silent oath, a living reminder of everything Eli had fought for and everything he had lost. His memory was the anchor that kept Eli grounded, and the invisible wellspring of his strength. Eli's thumb brushed the image of Jamal's face. The insult from Sterling and Dixon had been personal, yes, but it echoed a far deeper wound, the casual disregard for the sacrifices made by men like Jamal, by men like Eli. It was a reminder of a promise Eli had made to Jamal, a promise to always look out for the vulnerable, to fight against the unseen enemies, even when the world looked away. And in that moment, fueled by a simmering rage and a deep-seated purpose, Eli Vance, the homeless veteran, made a decision that would unravel a meticulously hidden truth. He didn't pull out a phone. Not then. Instead, his fingers, still possessing the dexterity of a trained operative, moved to a tiny, almost invisible seam in the lining of his jacket. From it, he extracted a microburner barely larger than a credit card and a minuscule encrypted satellite phone chip. These were not the tools of a vagrant. These were the vestiges of a former life, a life deep within the shadows of special operations, where communication was a matter of life and death, and secrets were kept, even from shadows. With practiced precision, Eli inserted the chip. The tiny device hummed to life. He tapped out a terse, coded sequence. A sequence only a handful of people in the world would recognize. It wasn't a casual call to the Pentagon. It was a highly sensitive, secure communication protocol, a ghost in the machine designed for emergency situations, for operatives who had gone dark. He uttered a single low word into the burner, a call sign from a forgotten war. The silence on the other end was broken by a stunned, immediate activation of high-level protocols, signaling that his message, his very existence, had just triggered a response from the deepest echelons of national security. What Eli had just done was not merely report an incident of police misconduct. He had inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, tripped an alarm bell that led directly to something far more sinister, far-reaching, and frankly terrifying. What Sterling and Dixon, with their petty abuses of power, couldn't have known was that their actions were part of a vast, covert, nationwide operation known as the District Directive. This wasn't just about harassing homeless veterans. This was a calculated, cold-blooded initiative, spearheaded by powerful, shadowy private equity firms and corrupt regional officials. Not just police, but city planning departments, zoning committees, and even seemingly benevolent housing charities that were nothing more than fronts. Their true aim, to acquire prime urban and rural land at rock-better prices through the systematic displacement and criminalization of vulnerable populations. And their favorite targets? Homeless veterans. Why? Because they were often seen as voiceless, isolated, and easy to disappear without public outcry. The District Directive operated with chilling efficiency. It involved financial incentives. Police departments and local councils received secret community revitalization grants, but these weren't for true community uplift. They were tied to unspoken quotas for clearing homeless encampments and specific city blocks, creating a false narrative of improved public safety. False narratives, disinformation campaigns subtly spread through local media and online forums painted homeless individuals, especially veterans, as public safety threats, drug addicts, or drains on taxpayer resources. They manipulated public opinion, turning neighbor against neighbor, making people believe that displacement was for the greater good. Legal loopholes. They exploited vague local ordinances, manipulated zoning laws, and even engaged in fraudulent eminent domain claims, all to justify evictions, demolitions, and land grabs under the guise of progress and development. Targeting veterans. This was the most insidious part. Veterans, often grappling with PTSD, injuries, and a lack of support, were specifically targeted. Their symptoms could be mislabeled as aggression, making them easier to arrest, to remove, to silence. It was a betrayal of the highest order, turning the very system meant to protect them into a weapon against them. This wasn't some random act of cruelty by two bad apples. This was organized, systemic, and utterly ruthless. It was the dark side of unchecked urban development, where the vulnerable were sacrificed for profit. And the incident at the Sunrise Diner, that seemingly minor act of harassment, was about to become the single thread that, once pulled, would unravel the entire, vast, interconnected web of the District Directive. It's meant to revive the entire, vast, interconnected web of the District Directive. Within hours of Eli's coded call, a quiet storm began to brew. Classified investigations were launched. Forensic data analysis teams working in secure facilities thousands of miles away began cross-referencing police reports with hidden financial transactions, shell company documents, and land acquisition records across multiple states. A shadow network of federal agents, the kind who operated without headlines or fanfare, began to move, their targets still unaware of the seismic shift that had just begun. For officers, Sterling and Dixon, their seemingly minor act of cruelty was about to escalate into something they couldn't possibly comprehend. They thought they had power, but soon they would discover they were merely pawns in a much larger game, and their casual disregard had just activated a true warrior, one who knew how to fight a war on unseen fronts. The chill of betrayal was about to turn into a frozen avalanche of justice. Eli Vance's call wasn't a frantic plea for help. It was a precise, coded message, a trigger fired into the secure channels of a world most people never even knew existed. And as the hours stretched into days, a silent storm began to gather, one that would rip through the deceptive calm of Harmony Creek and send ripples across the entire nation. Initially, no one noticed. Or rather, no one connected the dots. Outwardly, life in Harmony Creek continued as usual. Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, perhaps with a renewed sense of arrogant satisfaction, continued their patrols, unaware that their careers were already marked for termination, their actions meticulously logged and analyzed by unseen eyes. But beneath the surface, the ground was beginning to shift. Anonymous tips, highly specific and unassailable, began to flood federal agencies, not just about police misconduct, but about unusual real estate transactions, sudden changes in zoning ordinances, and inexplicable increases in private charity funding in seemingly unrelated small towns across various states. These weren't random occurrences. They were the first tremors of a meticulously coordinated investigation. Unexplained federal audits hit specific city planning departments, catching officials off guard. High-level security clearances were quietly revoked, leaving powerful individuals bewildered and disoriented. Retirements of mid-level officials, some sudden and without explanation, began to pepper local news cycles, small, isolated incidents that were, in fact, the first dominoes falling. Meanwhile, back in Harmony Creek, Maya, the brave waitress from the Sunrise Diner, found herself in an unexpected spotlight. That community outreach hotline she'd called? It wasn't just a local legal aid group, it was a grassroots organization with deep ties to investigative journalists and, as it turned out, a direct, albeit unofficial, line to certain federal watchdogs. Her initial, trembling call, seemingly minor, was now revealed to be a crucial piece of corroborating evidence. A detailed account of Sterling and Dixon's cruelty, coupled with Eli's high-level intel, painted a damning picture. Maya, initially hesitant, terrified even, found her voice, fueled by the sheer injustice she had witnessed. She shared her story with quiet courage, becoming an unsung hero whose simple act of decency provided the crucial local context the federal investigators needed. Her honest fear and growing resolve were a testament to the power of the everyday hero, reminding everyone that sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "No more." As the pieces rapidly coalesced, Eli Vance was brought in, not to a police station, but to a secure, undisclosed facility. There, he met with his former contacts, men and women he had served with, now high-ranking officials who looked at him with respect and regret. They didn't question his story. They already had confirmation, and then, with chilling precision, they revealed the true scope of the district directive. What Eli saw on those classified screens made his blood run cold. It wasn't just about Harmony Creek, it was a sophisticated nationwide operation. Private equity firms with names like Prosperity Holdings and Future Horizons acted as the financial architects, their tentacles reaching into every corner. They formed shell corporations and obscure housing charities to funnel illicit funds. These funds were then used to bribe municipal judges, secure corrupt city council votes, and influence local police departments like Harmony Creek's. The goal was always the same: acquire valuable land by systematically displacing the vulnerable, particularly homeless veterans, under the guise of community revitalization or public safety improvements. The raw data, the intercepted communications, the ledger entries showing kickbacks, it was irrefutable. The embarrassment necessary in leaving it all behind seemed too profound to be done. This was a crushing blow for Eli. He had fought enemies on foreign soil, had seen the worst of humanity in distant lands, but to realize that such a pervasive, systematic betrayal was happening on home soil against the very people he had sacrificed to protect was a different kind of pain. It wasn't just his dignity that had been stripped in that diner. It was the dignity of countless veterans, treated as expendable obstacles to profit. The grief for Jamal, his brother-in-arms, intertwined with this new burning anger. Jamal had died fighting for ideals, for freedom, and here that freedom was being quietly, systematically eroded by greed. This discovery didn't break Eli. It galvanized him, transforming his passive anger into a fierce strategic resolve. He knew what he had to do. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. And here's the twist. While the federal investigation rapidly closed in, Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, who had once held Eli's fate in their hands, found their own lives unraveling. They were suddenly under intense internal scrutiny, then suspended, then facing federal charges that linked their seemingly minor act of harassment directly to a massive racketeering and conspiracy investigation. They were bewildered, terrified. Their casual cruelty in Harmony Creek, their petty desire to clean up the town, had made them unwitting pawns in a much larger game. They were mere cogs in the district directive machine, and now they were utterly disposable. The once smug officers, who had reveled in their small-town power, suddenly found themselves staring down the barrel of a justice system far more powerful than any they had ever encountered. Their downfall was a testament to the dangerous arrogance of unchecked power, and how easily those who believe they are untouchable can become caught in the very web they help to weave. This wasn't just a story about two bad cops. This was about the insidious nature of systemic corruption, how it can leverage seemingly legitimate public services for private gain, exploiting the most vulnerable among us. Eli Vance, through his quiet act of defiance and his hidden connections, had just pulled a thread, and the entire rotten tapestry of the district directive was about to unravel for the whole world to see. The revelations were meticulously unrolled, not in a single explosive news report, but as a series of perfectly timed detonations. Eli Vance's intelligence, combined with Maya's eyewitness account and the meticulous work of the federal investigators, painted a picture so vile, so calculated, that it sent shockwaves through every corner of the nation. It began with whispers, then murmurs, then a roar that echoed from coast to coast. First, independent journalists, carefully vetted by Eli's former network, began to drop their stories. They weren't just isolated incidents of police misconduct. They were interconnected pieces of a much larger, horrifying puzzle. One day, it was a report on suspicious zoning changes in Phoenix, leading to a homeless encampment eviction. The next, a deep dive into non-profit housing trusts in Detroit that were funneling millions into offshore accounts while supposedly building affordable housing. Then came the damning financial data, showing how cities received secret grants, tied directly to the number of displaced individuals. The initial shock was palpable. People scrolled through their news feeds, disbelief turning to cold fury. But it was the stories of the people that truly ignited the fire. Heartbreaking interviews with dispossessed veterans, their voices trembling with shame and anger, played on every major news channel. Images of makeshift homes being bulldozed, of families separated, of Purple Heart recipients being treated like criminals. The narrative of public safety pushed by the district directive architects crumbled under the weight of undeniable human suffering. Harmony Creek, once a quiet, unassuming town, became the symbolic epicenter of this national outrage. The Sunrise Diner, ironically, transformed from a place of indignity into a beacon of hope. It became the backdrop for media interviews, impromptu community gatherings and vigils. Lines formed outside, not for coffee, but for impromptu solidarity rallies. The local community, initially unaware, now felt a collective shame that quickly morphed into righteous indignation. And Maya, the waitress, she found herself reluctantly thrust into the national spotlight, her trembling hands, her quiet dignity as she recounted Officer Sterling and Dixon's callous behavior, resonated with millions. She wasn't an activist, she was just an ordinary person who refused to look away. Her simple act of courage, that one desperate phone call, became a rallying cry, a testament to the power of a single individual to ignite a monumental change. If a waitress can make a difference, the refrain went, what about us? The legal avalanche that followed was swift and merciless. Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, the architects of Eli's humiliation, found themselves staring down the barrel of federal charges far more severe than simple misconduct. Racketeering, civil rights violations, conspiracy. Their names became synonymous with petty tyranny and systemic corruption. They were stripped of their badges, their careers, their dignity, and their faces became grim reminders on the evening news of the cost of unchecked power. Their pathetic figures, now terrified and bewildered, were a stark contrast to the growing strength of the movement they had inadvertently fueled. But then came the twist, a revelation that chilled the blood even further. As the investigations deepened, it became clear that Sterling and Dixon, and even some of the initially identified city officials, were not the true masterminds. They were just high-level pawns. The actual architects of the district directive were revealed to be a shadowy, powerful international corporate consortium. Their names, hidden behind layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts, were slowly unearthed. The Veritas Group, a seemingly legitimate global investment firm. They had infiltrated local governments through lobbying, campaign contributions, and the strategic placement of their operatives. They had leveraged their vast wealth to create a systematic structure of displacement, profiting from human misery on a scale that was truly sickening. These were not just local bad apples. This was a global syndicate, operating with a cold, calculated efficiency that defied imagination. This realization added another terrifying layer of complexity, making the fight even more daunting and globally interconnected. It wasn't just a local problem. It was a battle against unseen, wealthy powers that preyed on the most vulnerable across continents. The outrage was immense. Social media became a torrent of shared stories, legal advice, and calls to action. Protests erupted in cities large and small, fueled by a shared sense of injustice and a newfound empathy. People who had once walked past homeless individuals with averted gazes now stopped, listened, and demanded answers. The district directive, once a whispered conspiracy, was now exposed in its horrifying entirety, and the nation was awakening to the truth. This was not merely about justice for Eli Vance. It was about the reclamation of dignity for all those who had been cast aside. This was a testament to how often the small injustices are symptoms of much larger, hidden systems of oppression, and how the collective power of an enraged, empathetic public can begin to dismantle even the most entrenched corruption. The fight was far from over. The Veritas Group would not go down without a brutal struggle, but the tide had turned. The unseen warrior Eli Vance had lit a match, and the nation, stirred from its slumber, was about to become a roaring inferno of empathy and defiance. The roar of public outrage, fueled by the relentless exposure of the district directive and the sinister Veritas Group, transformed into a powerful wave of action. It wasn't just about punishment anymore, it was about rebuilding, and Harmony Creek, once a symbol of injustice, was about to become a shining example of reclamation and rebirth. The legal battles were arduous but unrelenting. Assets from the Veritas Group, those vast sums amassed through the exploitation of the vulnerable, were systematically frozen and seized. Those funds, once used to fund corruption, were now funneled into restitution, and more importantly, into tangible projects for those who had been wronged. The most immediate and visible change in Harmony Creek was the creation of Veterans Haven, built on land reclaimed from the very developers who had colluded with the district directive. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a state-of-the-art housing complex for homeless veterans. Each unit was designed with dignity in mind, small, comfortable, and private, offering a stable foundation. The sounds of construction, once a symbol of displacement, now echoed with the promise of new beginnings. Alongside Veterans Haven, the Phoenix Center rose from the ashes, a comprehensive, free mental health clinic specifically designed for veterans. Here, professionals specialized in treating PTSD, substance abuse, and the complex trauma of military to civilian transition. It was a place where hidden wounds could finally begin to heal, where therapy sessions were met with understanding, not judgment. Volunteers, many of them ordinary citizens who had been moved by Eli's story, filled the hallways, offering support, friendship, and a sense of community that had been systematically denied. But it wasn't just about housing and healing. The economic opportunities that had been systematically stripped away were now actively being restored. Robust job training and placement programs, funded by the seized assets and new government grants, specifically targeted veteran employment. Harmony Creek saw former soldiers retraining as electricians, IT specialists, carpenters, and even small business owners. The local economy began to hum with a new purpose, driven by the very people it had once cast aside. Public squares were renamed in honor of fallen heroes, and the town established an annual Harmony Creek Day of Honor, a community-led initiative to celebrate veterans and foster genuine integration. And at the heart of this rebirth, subtly but profoundly, was Eli Vance. He didn't seek the spotlight, he had never been one for grand gestures, but his quiet strength, his lived experience, and his strategic mind made him invaluable. He established a peer support group for veterans at the Phoenix Center, a place where men and women who had walked similar paths could share their burdens and find solidarity. He mentored new arrivals to Veterans Haven, offering not just advice but understanding, and behind the scenes he consulted on national policy reform for veteran welfare, his insights shaping legislation that would protect countless others from ever falling victim to another district directive. His military discipline, once used for combat, was now channeled into community building, his tactical brilliance applied to systemic change. The profound shift within Eli himself was a quiet miracle. The heavy weight of grief and rage that had once pressed so heavily on his shoulders, driving him through the lonely nights, began to lift. It didn't vanish entirely, the scars of war and betrayal run deep, but it transformed. It became a deep-seated sense of purpose, a quiet strength. The nightmares that had haunted him for so long began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of peace, hard-won but finally within reach. He would often find himself gazing at the faded photo of Jamal "Ghost" Evans, not with the crushing sorrow of loss, but with profound pride and gratitude. Jamal's spirit wasn't a ghost of the past. It was a guiding light, a silent partner in the victories of the present. Eli knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that their fight had not been in vain. As for Officer Sterling and Officer Dixon, their arrogance proved to be their undoing. Stripped of their badges, facing federal charges that compounded their initial municipal offenses, they became the public faces of corruption. The endless legal proceedings, the crushing weight of public condemnation, and ultimately lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the District Directive 1101 District Directive served as a stark and undeniable contrast to the rising dignity of Eli and the renewed spirit of Harmony Creek. Their pathetic figures, once symbols of unchecked power, now stood as grim reminders of justice served however long it took. The revolution of empathy, ignited by a simple act of cruelty and a single courageous call, spread far beyond the borders of Harmony Creek. Other towns and cities across the nation, inspired by the systematic dismantling of the Veritas Group and the transformative model of Harmony Creek, began to adopt similar initiatives. The District Directive, though its tendrils were deep, was being methodically rooted out, its remaining architects facing international legal scrutiny and massive asset freezes. The fight for justice, as Eli knew, was never truly over. It was an ongoing struggle, a continuous vigil. But the victories, hard-won and meaningful, showed that even the most formidable systems of oppression could be challenged, and ultimately overcome, when ordinary people dared to stand up. Harmony Creek, once a small town cloaked in deceptive peace, had become a testament to the power of human spirit, a place where the broken were mended, the lost were found, and dignity was reclaimed. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, a new dawn can always break. A year had passed since the snow-dusted streets of Harmony Creek became the unlikely battleground for justice. Another winter had come, blanketing the town in pristine white once more, but this time the chill in the air was just the weather. The biting cold of betrayal had melted away, replaced by the warmth of community, the glow of renewed hope, and the quiet hum of purpose. The Sunrise Diner was bustling, not with the hushed whispers of indifference, but with the cheerful clatter of plates and the lively chatter of friends. Maya, no longer just a brave waitress, was thriving. She was taking night classes, pursuing a degree in social justice, her once trembling hands now confidently turning the pages of textbooks on human rights law. Her small, courageous act had not only changed Eli's life, but had set her on a path of profound personal growth, proving that one moment of decency can ignite a lifelong passion for justice. And Elias Vance? He wasn't walking the streets alone anymore. He was a familiar, respected figure in Harmony Creek. You might find him at Veterans Haven, sharing a laugh with a former resident who now had a job and a home, or at the Phoenix Center, leading a peer support group, his quiet wisdom offering solace to those still battling their internal demons. He spoke with a newfound lightness, the deep lines around his eyes now softened by genuine smiles. The heavy burden of grief and rage, though never entirely erased, had transformed into a profound sense of purpose. He saw the faces of the veterans he was helping, and in their eyes he saw the echoes of Jamal, knowing their fight, their sacrifice, now had a lasting impact. Eli often found himself at the newly dedicated Harmony Creek Veterans Plaza, a beautiful, quiet space carved out of what was once derelict land. A simple, elegant monument listed the names of local fallen heroes, and a quiet fountain trickled, a constant reminder of renewal. Standing there, looking up at the vast, indifferent sky, Eli felt the presence of Jamal Ghost Evans, not as a painful loss, but as a silent, guiding strength. They had fought for this, they had lost for this, and now they had won. Eli Vance, the unseen warrior, was finally seen, his dignity restored, his legacy echoing not just in the plaza, but in the transformed lives of countless veterans. The story of Harmony Creek, of the district directive and its eventual dismantling, became a powerful case study, taught in universities, discussed in newsrooms, and held up as an example of what happens when a community stands up. The Veritas Group, though immense and powerful, faced relentless international legal scrutiny. Their assets were frozen globally, their reputation shattered, their dark network exposed. The fight for systemic change is never truly over, for new shadows always emerge, but Harmony Creek proved that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be challenged and ultimately defeated when ordinary people dared to stand up. So what is the lesson we draw from Eli Vance's journey? It is a stark reminder of the cost of silence, the price of indifference, the insidious nature of systemic injustice that can hide behind smiles and official directives. But it is also a powerful, undeniable testament to the extraordinary, transformative power of just one act of courage. If you have ever felt unheard, unseen, or deeply betrayed by a system, by a society, remember Elias Vance. Your story, your experience, holds immense, undeniable power. It is not just your burden, it is your catalyst for profound change, a spark waiting to ignite a revolution of justice. And if you witness injustice, whether it's blatant cruelty on a street corner or the quiet, insidious erosion of dignity from behind a desk, what would you do? Would you be brave enough to make that call? To speak up? To stand with the vulnerable? To ignite the spark that changes everything, not just for one person, but for an entire generation? Eli Vance walked through Harmony Creek, his steps steady, his head held high, his heart at last beginning to find its way back to the light. His story, the echo of the unseen warrior, lives on, a powerful reminder that even in the deepest chill of betrayal, the warmth of hope, justice, and human connection can always, always prevail. If this story moved you, if it sparked a fire within you, if you believe in the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of resilience, courage, and the unwavering fight for justice in a world that desperately needs your voice.